Good evening, good afternoon, good day. Welcome, everyone. Hello,
Hello.
John.
Hi,
And Barbara?
I'm Barbara.
Barbara?
Excellent. Okay, great.
I predict that you will probably never, and if it's not never, then it's going to be very rarely see us separately.
Okay. Well, that will help with the names.
We're, we're, we're like glue.
Okay, beautiful.
Mhm.
Well, welcome, everyone, to the Tuesday night tune-in. And this evening, we're going to have our usual program. But before that, I just want to make one brief announcement, which is that tomorrow I'll be going off to lead a retreat. And so there won't be any morning meditations on tomorrow, Wednesday, or the day after that, which is Thursday. So the public morning meditations are paused for this week. Then we'll go back to the regular schedule. But just want to say that before I forget.
Mhm.
Welcome, Pedro. Welcome, Virginia. And so, as I was saying, it's Tuesday night. Hi. And we'll go ahead and start with a very lightly guided meditation this evening. And we'll do maybe 20-25 minutes of that, and then shift into the Dhamma talk. And then we'll have some time for questions and comments afterward.
Sounds good.
Okay, great. So beginning by muting your mics if you haven't already done so, and establishing your steady meditation posture. Really feeling your body settling on your seat. Allowing the belly to relax and soften. And as best you can, bringing the spine into alignment so that your posture is upright. letting those bones stack up all the way through the neck. And knowing that the bones are carrying the weight of the body. Just relaxing the shoulders and the chest. And now turning the attention to the sensation of hearing. Without straining to listen to anything in particular, just allowing sound to arrive and create the sensations of hearing in each moment. Staying curious from moment to moment about sensations of hearing. attending closely to sensations of hearing. And just allowing them to be fleeting. Observing the change. Allowing everything else to recede into the background. And just returning time and again to attend to sensations of hearing. Staying with the sensations of hearing. Perhaps also beginning to notice whether they're unpleasant or neutral or pleasant. Now, coming to the end of the meditation, and listening to the sound of the bell, and perhaps attending to the one that knows the sound of the bell. What is it that knows the sound? Okay, so that was our meditation practice for this evening. And if you have any questions or thoughts about that, we can talk about that at the end of the evening here. So for now, I'm going to go ahead and just shift into the Dhamma talk. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. Today I was on Twitter, as I sometimes am, often am. And I saw the beginnings of a very interesting conversation. So somebody who I don't know asked a question about God. And the question was, is the fact that some people defend God a sign that there isn't one, that God isn't really real? And when I read that question, I thought, oh, I think that what this person is pointing at is the way that certain kinds of defensiveness or aggression or conflict have arisen out of the concept of God. But my friend, Sensei Alex, took it in a different tack. And Sensei Alex is a Dhamma teacher who has written a couple of books. I had the pleasure of writing a blurb, as they say, for his first book. And he's also a big tweeter. And Sensei Alex said this. He said, well, in Buddhism, we don't deny, we don't deny a Christian God, the kind of Christian God that people believe in, or any kind of God for that matter. We just don't revere them because we know that they are part of samsara. They're part of the cycle of you can say just the cycle of birth and death in general. And then he said this, he said, liberation can only be found through the purification of body, speech, and mind. So that's a very interesting statement. And I saw that as Sensei sort of echoing the three, you could say the three main admonitions of Buddhism, which is cease to do evil, do the wholesome, and purify the mind. And we should talk a little bit more about what we mean by purification, and we'll see if I get to that in this talk. But in any event, then the very interesting reply came from a totally different person, not the same person who had started the conversation, as often happens on Twitter. And somebody who I also don't know said, I disagree. Liberation can be found through succumbing to your every desire. And I thought, oh, right. I understand what this person is saying, I think, right? That freedom is getting to do what you want and not having to do what you don't want. That's one way to think about freedom. Or maybe this person was just being sarcastic and cheeky. I don't know. It's hard to tell sometimes on Twitter how serious people are or sarcastic they're being, or just trying to say something outrageous. Sometimes it seems like that's also what's going on. But in any event, I read that response and I thought the first thing that came to me was, oh yeah, well, how's that going for you? Right? Because if one spends their entire life's energy pursuing desire, pursuing their every desire, as this person said it, then wouldn't that kind of be like being a slave to desire? Wouldn't that be being dragged around by your desire? How would that be free? In fact, I would say it would seem like a very unhappy existence, because you'll never find satisfaction, right? You would never feel complete or whole if that's actually what you are trying to accomplish. Mm. To fulfill every single desire. And surely one would end up probably experiencing a lot of conflict in life also, right? Because surely some of your desires are going to be at odds with other people's desires. I mean, that would seem kind of inevitable. The other story that came to mind, or the other response that came to mind, was that there were some friends of mine who were here visiting the Vihara a couple months back. And they brought their two girls. It wasn't their first time. They'd been here numerous times with the two girls. Like I want to say 4 years old and maybe 2 years old. Okay, little girls. And so we had breakfast together. We had some chat time, and then there is a playground right out back behind the Vihara, in the meadow behind here in the common area. There's a kids' playground. And so we went out to the playground with the kids, with the girls. And the dad had brought a book with them because the adults were going to be chatting for some period of time. And so he thought, well, it'd be good to have something to give the kids to do while the adults were chatting. Turned out that while we were chatting, they weren't interested in the book. They were more interested in what we were talking about, even if they don't understand sometimes. That's how it works out. But anyway, we went out to the playground, and then suddenly one of the girls got interested in the book. Okay, great. So she sat down and started reading the book. And then, as sometimes happens, her older sister wanted to read the book too. And so then the conflict ensued, right? And then there was some crying and some thrashing about and some sad faces and some, whining to the parents and various other expressions of, some dukkha, some unsatisfactoriness, because there's only one book. And it didn't belong actually to either one of them. At least it didn't seem like that. It was like a common book, and Dad had brought it. So it wasn't like one of the girls could say, well, I brought it and therefore I get to read it. So there wasn't really any kind of easy, simple way to just say, well, one of them should have it or not. And immediately it became obvious, right? In fact, I said it there as we were talking, like, oh, you see how when you want that thing and she wants that thing, that's difficult if there's only the one thing. Then how do you resolve that? So surely the endless pursuit of one's every desire is going to lead to some conflict as well. So unsatisfactory in many ways because it will not be fulfilled, and plenty of conflict. That doesn't sound like a good recipe for a lot of freedom in my book, but maybe, again, this person was just being cheeky. But it points to the fact that, as small kids eventually learn, sometimes it's better not to pursue what you want in the moment. Right? Sometimes there are a few problems if you don't do that. Sometimes you realize that there's the greater good to be thought about. There's maybe a good feeling that comes with generosity, right? So eventually what happened was, in this story, the little one gave the book to the older one. And then it was our, adults' turn to say, oh, wow, great, look, you did this thing. You were generous, you gave her the book because you wanted the book too, right? And give her some positive for that, which she might be able to also give herself at some point. But anyway, you learn that sometimes you don't pursue the thing that you want, everything that you want. You also learn that, for example, that sometimes wanting can spin out of control. Right? This is one of the factors in addiction. That wanting can tend to spin out of your control, out of your ability to really even respond to the wanting anymore. So then the question is, well, is Buddhism just delayed gratification? Is that really what we're teaching people, to just delay their desires or set them aside? And of course, that wouldn't be my view. I would say that actually, when we practice, we are actually exercising many kinds of freedom already, long before we arrive at some kind of big grand goal of freedom. Just practicing is exercising a certain kind of freedom, right? Exercising that freedom to not be dragged around by our desires or by our aversions, to whatever degree we're capable of doing that. Exercising our freedom to take time for ourselves, to get to know ourselves. What is this human life that I'm living? What is going on in this body and mind? How can I become more familiar with that? Exercising our freedom to choose a life that has less suffering in it, less conflict in it. And I would say the promise of much of Buddhism is about finding our freedom within this very life, within this very mind and body as it is, with knowing that our desires will not ever be completely fulfilled. Right? Being able to find our peace with that. Rather than looking to some external being, which may or may not be eternal, right? Early Buddhism, in early Buddhism, what we see in the discourses is that there are no eternal beings, that all beings go through a process of birth and life and death of some sort. Even beings that think that they're eternal, or beings that live for inconceivable periods of time, inconceivably great periods of time. Then in later Buddhism, you start to see actually some ideas about eternal beings that could possibly be eternal, like the transcendent, what we call the transcendental bodhisattvas. So like Kannon, or also known as Kuan Yin or Avalokiteshvara, is understood to be eternal. I take that to mean like the quality of compassion that she or he or they represent is timeless. But some people relate to them as a being, as an actual being. But in any event, not the proposition of much of Buddhism, and this is not true of, I think there are very few things you can say about all traditions of Buddhism. So we should be clear that I'm talking, that I'm not making a blanket statement that all Buddhism is like this, because it's not true. There are many, many variations, hundreds of variations. But generally speaking, I'd say that Buddhism doesn't require you to rely on some other being in order to find your freedom. That there's the understanding that you yourself must actually walk the path to do that. Right? And you can do some of that right here and right now. And begin to see the workings of your mind. We've talked a little bit in recent months about the difference between wanting your content to be different and wanting the process to be different, right? So if we want the content of our experience to be different, that is within the scope usually of what we can choose as human beings. We can choose to study this or practice that or do a certain kind of work or listen to a certain kind of music, etc. But if we want the fundamental process of being a human being to change, that is also a recipe for a lot of conflict, inner conflict. Because there is, you could say, there is the expression of the universal principles of impermanence and conditionality at work within a human life. Those things aren't going to change. For example, like the 5 aggregates model or the 4 noble truths model is about pointing at how that mechanism works within our lives. And so our effort there is not to try to resist or change those universal principles that are at work in life, is to understand them, to perceive them, to understand them so profoundly and viscerally and thoroughly that we are willing to let go of our confusion and our resistance to that. And just know that's how it works. So if that's how it works, then learn how to work with that, not against it. So there is the form of freedom, exercising our freedom to learn how to see ourselves as conditioned beings, beings that are subject to these different forms of movement, of change, of relationship. And then finally, there's one more layer I would add, I would suggest, in terms of how to understand freedom within Buddhism. Probably more strongly emphasized, I would say, in the early Buddhist schools. But I'm going to use a later Mahayana Buddhist example tonight and read some of the Heart Sutra as a way of talking about this. But the other sort of going beyond even freedom within conditioned existence is to think about Nibbana. Is the Nibbana or Nirvana might be the way that the word that some of you might be more familiar with. That's the Sanskrit language version of the word Nirvana. Again, not the band, not the perfume, not the t-shirts. But you could say it is described as something which is birthless and deathless. It's not a thing, actually. So even using something is like that. It's like, so when there is the unconditioned, when the conditioned is no longer part of our experiential plane, then there is the experience of Nibbana. Although you aren't there for it, but there is a knowing that can be reflected upon. So let me talk about a little bit about how the Heart Sutra talks about this, because I really like that part. And then I'll give you an example. Hopefully so now I've expanded my repertoire from one prop to now two, if I use my new prop today. So this is what's called the Heart Sutra, the Hridaya Prajna Paramita. That's also Sanskrit language. And Prajna Paramita means can be translated as the wisdom beyond wisdom, or the highest wisdom. And this particular sutra, the Heart Sutra, it literally means the physical heart, but that's not the reference here, I would suggest. It's not about that. It's about the heart, as in like the heart of the matter, the kernel of it, of wisdom. So this sutra, I'm not going to have time to go through the whole thing, but I will go through a bit of it just to give you a little bit of the background before I get to the phrases that in particular relate to nirvana. So, and I have in front of me the Aloka Vihara translation. There's also many other translations. The one that I usually know by heart is the San Francisco Zen Center translation. So the sutra begins with this transcendental bodhisattva that I mentioned earlier, Avalokiteshvara. She's also known as Kuan Yin or Kannon or Kanzeon or Chenrezig in Tibetan. There are many different cultures that relate to this ideal of a being or a quality of being that represents compassion, represents meeting suffering with care, attending to suffering with what's needed. The name Avalokiteshvara, the Sanskrit name of this, earliest name of this, this bodhisattva. So bodhisattva just literally means awakening being. Her Sanskrit name can be, again, there are various translations, but one way to think about it is one who hears the cries of the world. One who hears the cries of the world. So this sutra is a one half of a conversation between her, and she's also sometimes known as he or they or gender neutral or all different kinds of different manifestations, with Sariputta, Venerable Sariputta Mahatera, who was the Buddha's right-hand man, you could say, his most esteemed disciple in the Dhamma. And so just to say, this historically probably didn't happen like this. This is someone's envisioning of a teaching. But we don't know for a fact. But we do know that this text came into being. It would have been written down around the same time that the early suttas were written down, but it was much newer at that time. But they were all being written down. The older teachings and the newer teachings were all being written down around the same time. So in any event, so there's this conversation happening in which the voice of compassion is telling the voice of early Buddhist wisdom, the personage of early Buddhist wisdom next to the Buddha, that's what Sariputta represents, about the emptiness of various parts of human existence. And by that, we mean that they're conditional, that they don't have an inherent permanent essence, right? They are not only impermanent, but that they are interdependent with other things. They cannot be present without their dependence on conditions, other conditions. So there's this conversation happening, and she is going through a whole list of things that are said to be like that are said to be empty of permanent existence. And so she says things like the eyes and the ears and the things that are seen and the things that are heard. That's why we did the hearing meditation today. And various and sundry other things, ignorance. And then she gets to this part. No suffering, no cause, no cessation, no path. So that's a reference to the four truths as they were described by the Buddha in his very first discourse, that there is suffering, or dukkha is the word. Unsatisfactoriness is probably a better translation, but suffering is our kind of shorthand for it, mostly in the West. And that there is a cause, or you could say a foundation for dukkha, which is tanha, which is craving. And that there is the possibility, and in fact, he had himself completed the cessation of that craving, and thereby the cessation of dukkha, the cessation of suffering or unsatisfactoriness. And the way to do that is through the Noble Eightfold Path, through the path of practice. So she's saying no to that thing, meaning that those things are equally conditional. They are equally concepts, actions, things that we experience in a human life as conditioned events, right? Dependent on certain understandings, dependent on our physical experience of them, and so on. So no suffering, no cause, no cessation, no path. They are interdependent. And then there's the no attainment, no understanding or no knowledge, and no attainment. So So some people take this literally to mean that there is no possibility of ever developing any kind of special insight, but I don't think that that's actually what this means. I think again that what it means is that up until this point, up until Nibbana, which we're going to talk about in a second, Nirvana, that it's all conditioned. Everything, even insight, even the most sublime meditations are also volitional and conditioned. That is an insight that we are intended to learn, actually, if you look at various discourses, including the shorter and the longer discourses on emptiness. That's middle length discourse 121 and 122. But here's the next bit. So when nothing is attained, or when there is no attainment, then the bodhisattva, through reliance on wisdom, is unimpeded in their mind, or their mind is said to be unbounded. And there is no fear. So this is a very interesting way. So now we're moving into another situation. So having left, we start to leave the conditioned behind, and then there isn't a way to define the boundary of oneself or even one's mind, because you don't have the markers to relate to, so to speak. And there is no fear, because why? Because fear is about loss. And if the conditioned is being left behind, then it's like that. It's all lost in that sense, right? Not lost like it's gone. It's still there, but it's not within your experiential plane anymore. So one leaves distorted dream thinking far behind. That's one way to translate that line. Or the other one is sort of leaves inverted views. So that's a reference. We see this language in the early discourses, that the Buddha would give a teaching to someone, or one of the venerables would give a teaching to someone, and she would be so wise that the person who received the teaching would say, you have turned right side up what had been upside down, right? That I misunderstood things, and I was seeing it upside down, and now I see it the right way, the upright way. And so far beyond all inverted views, one realizes nirvana. One realizes nirvana. So one realizes that there is a reality which is unconditioned. And so we might say, well, that's like, so far off the course of what would be possible for me. Like, I can barely deal with, getting my dinner on the table, right? Or whatever it is. I don't eat dinner, so I use that example because it's easy for me to say. But I want to give you an example. This is where my new prop comes in, and then we could discuss whether this feels like it's a good metaphor for you, whether it's a helpful metaphor for you. So I want to suggest that one way to think about this, how to approach the unconditioned, and so I'm also this retreat that I'm going on that I mentioned earlier. So I'll be gone from Wednesday to Sunday, leading a retreat, which is the capping retreat for a 6-month course on the approach to Nibbana for Dharma teachers. There's a course that was partially hosted by IMCW, Insight Meditation Community of Washington, for their Dharma teachers. And so I've been thinking a lot about this, about how we approach the unconditioned over the last 6 months, and been teaching about this. So I have my handy dandy bag of bubblegum jelly beans. This is my prop for tonight. Okay, so now you, in your meditation, you first have to figure out how to open the bag, right? You have to figure out how to observe your mind, right? So, okay. So once you get that part, then you've opened the bag and you can get your little hand in there and observe a particular phenomena. Okay, so here we have a particular phenomena. This is your jelly bean. And it could be anything. It could be just as we did in the earlier meditation, some sound as arriving at your ear, particular phenomena. And you might look at the qualities of that thing or whatever, but inevitably you will, ideally, that's the purpose of the practice, is to see that it is conditioned, that it is impermanent, it is fleeting, it is conditioned, right? The phenomena will arise, persist for some period of time, and cease. So it's gone, right? Your phenomenon is gone. So it was conditioned. You know that it was conditioned. You might not be able to see the ending of all phenomena. Some of them take longer, like the end of the sun, for example, would be beyond the scope of your lifetime, most likely, unless things really go awry in the next few years. But you're taking phenomena and you're looking at phenomena and your mind is learning little bit by little bit. This is conditioned. Okay, so we're going to set that one aside. Okay, this one, oh, also conditioned. Okay, we're going to set that one aside. That's not nirvana. This one, well, what is it, guys? Conditioned. It's not nirvana, right? So this is why the Buddha also has many discourses in which he says, the one who actually achieves nirvana is the one who wants it, who intends it, who is eager, who is diligent in the pursuit of nibbana. So what? So you keep looking at conditions. Next, jelly bean, still conditioned, right? Next jelly bean, conditioned, right? You take out a whole handful of jelly beans, whatever it is you see in body and mind, right? Conditioned. Eventually, and we don't know at what point, we don't know how many jelly beans it takes, right? For each one of us, it's a different number actually, and we don't know how many it is. But eventually, the mind goes, oh, the whole bag is jelly beans, conditioned. And that's Nibbana. That letting go of everything. And everything is a lot, right? This is why it said you're not actually there, but there is some knowing that is there because it can be reflected upon after the experience of it. And we have the people who have brought back those teachings and we've recorded that stuff. So this is my proposal, my prop for today. And yes, for those of you who are worried, jelly beans are an allowable for monastics who are practicing Vinaya. It's okay. I didn't break a big rule by putting that jelly bean in my mouth. That's actually okay. Totally well within bounds. I don't have to confess it. But what I do want to say is coming back to the Heart Sutra, right? That the conditionality, so the way to approach, one way, because there are many ways, one way that I'm proposing tonight to approach the unconditioned is by studying the conditioned with diligence, in detail, with precision, and over again, seeing that it is conditioned, seeing that fact, training the mind to be willing to see that fact. And that fact is hard for human beings because we'd much rather just be all out pursuing our every desire. Some of us. Until we learn that that actually isn't going to lead to the freedom that Nibbana will. Because once you've dropped everything, then guess what? There is nothing that dominates you, nor do you need to dominate anything else. You are free of everything. Free of everything, including bubblegum jelly beans. So I'm going to leave you finally with a poem as I like to do sometimes, from the Teres, from the awakened women of the Buddha's time. And this is a poem. I'm not going to read the whole poem, actually. I'm going to only read part of her poem. My apologies to Venerable Kisa Gotami. Maybe I'll tell more of Kisa Gotami's story in a future Tuesday night tune-in. But as part of her poem describing her awakening, she says this. She says, I followed the Noble Eightfold Path that goes to that which is without death. Nibbana is known firsthand. I have seen that, now this is the interesting line. I have seen myself in the mirror of the Dhamma. I have seen myself in the mirror of the Dhamma. So when you let go of the jelly bean bag, there is the reality of the total unconditioned. And then there is also a return. This human being returns to the experience of the conditioned, right? Arahants, people who have woken up, they don't die on the spot. They have a body. They're able to walk and talk and teach and eat, and they have to do all those things, right? That keeps going. But there was something seen in the mirror of the Dhamma, seen in that dropping off and seen in the re-arising, the re-establishment of the mind that attends to the conditioned. Now, she says, could go continue on with her Kisa Maha Teri Venerable Kisa Gotami's poem. This is, I'm going to say the Charles Hallisey translation. I usually use his. I think his is pretty good. He also does a nice job of telling their backstories at the back of this book called Therigatha, Poems of the First Buddhist Women. She says, I've seen myself in the mirror of the Dhamma. Now I am someone with he translated as depravities, but that I really dislike that word. It's more like the asavas, I believe it's the asavas, the stains, or what we call stains is good. Taints, stains on the mind. The darts cut out, with the burden laid down. With the burden laid down, who has done what needs to be done? So she says, now I am someone with the darts cut out, the burden laid down. The burden of what? Of pursuing desire, among other things. Who has done what needs to be done? The nun, Kisa Gotami, her mind freed, said this. She says of herself, I said this. So that is my Dhamma talk for this evening. Thank you so much for your attention.